What's good, people? Lockdown day 45. Today we're going to talk about something different. We're going to talk about something that's very close to my heart. You guys know that I've been a comic book reader, love of artwork, penciling since 1974. That's when I picked up my first comic book. And since then, I've been a connoisseur of the genre and never looked back. A lot of my friends, you guys included, at some stage of your life, stopped reading, stopped buying, stopped enjoying what the comic book genre used to be able to give you, and it still does. But there's a new wave of comic book fan, not necessarily called a comic book fan, more a superhero fan. And those are the type of people that have created this Marvel versus DC thing, which I need to address. And I get these questions all the time. You guys know that I don't really get involved in too much of that. That's because as soon as someone says to me, "Are you a Marvel or DC fan?" you can tell straight away that they've given up the boat. They've given up the fact that they really don't understand the industry. Marvel and DC are both comic book companies. In fact, they're the titans of the industry. Yeah, there's a lot more people in the game. Dark Horse, IDW, Valiant Comics, Image. There's a lot more people in the game. DC Comics starting everything in 1938, Marvel coming on the 40s. In sport, if you look at basketball, football, Formula One, many people say it's a copycat sport. Because what they do is, if they see something great from another company, they copy it and change it and do something else. So a lot of the characters variably are mirror images of each other. If someone's asking you if you're a Marvel or DC fan, they really don't know comics. First of all, Marvel and DC are not the same. Never have been, never will be. Marvel is about people, humans, who are flawed, and these heroes are always fighting within themselves to be the person that they want to be. And that's what's enjoyable and always has been about Marvel. It's great to see the likes of Spider-Man, the most famous hero, because he's always known as the hard luck kid. The kid that can't get the girl, the kid that can't hold down a job, the kid that struggles in society because he's different, he's smart, he's a geek, he's not cool, yeah? To varying degrees, a lot of people can associate themselves with Spider-Man. DC, when I used to buy DC Comics, the logo used to say for mature readers. And this is how things really start to change between the two companies. When you go to see a Marvel movie, you see a lot of humor, a lot of jokes. In fact, in my reviews over the years, some of that has been very critical of Marvel, because there are some characters that you can do that with, and there are some characters that you can't. When I saw Doctor Strange at the cinema, I nearly fell off my chair because there's no humor, no jokes, no fun in Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange 2, the new movie that's coming up soon, hopefully was going to start to change all of that, but the director ended up leaving the project because Marvel brought him on as a horror director, because that's what that is. Doctor Strange is the pinnacle of Marvel Tales comics. That was a comic that introduced the likes of Blade, Moon Knight. It was a comic that introduced magic, the mystic arts, werewolves, supernatural beings like Dracula. That's where the Dracula of the Marvel exists. And Doctor Strange was never meant to be what it is in the MCU. How many times have you seen Doctor Strange smile in an MCU film? Exactly. Because that character is a very serious character, and Marvel basically turned him into a joke. And that's the reason why a lot of people like me didn't really favor the Doctor Strange movie, because it was branded as this humorous, funny film, which didn't really drop. That, in its entirety, is how we change from DC. DC's tones are very serious. And a lot of people who see the movies, sometimes when they want to go for a fun, enjoyable, jokey film, at most times it's not going to be with DC Comics. They have been able to do that at some point. Shazam is a 15-year-old kid, and it's one of the most humorous and funny films that we've seen in recent years. And you can do that with certain things. But when you're talking about DC in adjacent to Marvel, DC are not flawed humans who are trying to be perfect. The DC heroes are gods among men. That's the tag for DC. A lot of you who've played video games have seen the video game called Injustice, Gods Among Men. And Injustice is one of the best stories to ever come out of comics in the last 20 years. And the reason for this is DC's made up of gods. They're made up of aliens, Manhunter, Superman, yeah? The gods, obviously, we're talking about Shazam. We're talking about Wonder Woman, yeah? Demigod. We're talking about people who are at the pinnacle of human perfection. These characters have no flaws. They have no social flaws in the way how you see Marvel characters. They are perfect. And the whole tag about them is how these super-powered, all-universal beings band together to become the perfect team, which is the Justice League. Now, overall, guys, here's the deal. The biggest, most famous superhero in the world is Batman. He stands for something that no Marvel hero stands for. You see, what happens when a human is surrounded by gods and aliens and beings that can destroy the planet with a blink of an eye? You get someone like Batman, who, as the Joker says, is one bad day away from being him. In other words, Batman is kind of crazy, kind of messed up, but he tries to hold it together every day. One of the most famous stories in DC Comics is called The Tower of Babel. There's actually a movie about it called Justice League Doom, and I've told everybody to go out and check it out. And it's a story about what the DC Universe stands for. A man, a normal human, who's at the pinnacle of intelligence, pinnacle strength, a human who's trained his body to the peak of human perfection. Batman is afraid. He lives his life every day on the edge because in thought of one of these superpowered gods or aliens losing it and taking over the planet. So he created a database on how to beat every single one of these superpowered beings. And if you're a comic reader, you know that. If you're not, then you're probably one of these people that when Batman vs Superman came out was saying, this is ridiculous. How can Batman beat Superman? That tells everybody pretty much what you know about comics. Batman is 3 steps ahead of literally every person on the planet, including Lex Luthor, the greatest criminal mind and one of the best villains of all time. And what it does is it shows the disparity between how both universes work. Because Marvel have flawed characters, and you're on that amazing journey with them in order for them to find that place that they deserve to be in. But most importantly, guys, what you have to understand as a comic book reader is when you go to a comic shop and you walk into a comic shop and you say, you speak to the salesman, you speak to the people who are looking at comics, and you say, yeah, what's up, guys, man? What's the deal? What's the in thing? What's the story I need to be reading? They don't say, oh, go and check out this Marvel, DC. They don't say that. There's no tags. You might get pointed to a comic that is Marvel, DC, Image, IDW, or Dark Horse. There is no label on enjoying a great story with great artwork. And this is where a lot of people, especially millennials, especially the younger people who are growing up, who are fans of the movies and both movies, Marvel and DC. What you have to understand is that in this industry, the 2 publishers will have writers and artists that have worked for both publishers. And the reason why they do that is because of the varying differences in characters. You can do things in DC that you can't do in Marvel. You can do things in Marvel that you can't do in DC. And that's how it works. And in order for you to enjoy the fruits of writing about these characters, and let's remember, the likes of Superman is very, very difficult to write for, because you're talking about a man who is essentially a god. How are you going to write about a character like that when there's practically nothing that can hurt him? Practically. So it's always been a challenge to differentiate yourself between the two. And many people who have been in the industry and comic book readers for decades can do that. Others can't. And that's why you hear all this stuff going, are you Marvel or DC? Oh, I prefer Marvel, or I prefer... When you're reading a comic book, guys, you're reading a comic book because of the story. You're reading a comic book because of the quality of the pencils and the artwork. You're reading it because of the production. If it's a great story, you don't say, oh, I'm not reading it because it's Marvel. Oh, I'm not reading it because it's DC. If it's a great story, you read it. And this, unfortunately, has not really translated over to the cinemas. Because in today's market, people like to put things in boxes. And you've heard me talk about this before, even when I did a PlayStation 5 versus Xbox review. We live in a world where people like to categorize things because they feel like they belong to something. If you go left or right, you feel like you belong somewhere. And the same is with Labour, Conservative, Republican, Democrat. People don't seem to understand the moderate stage, the in-between stage, because that's where you're able to make better decisions. If you don't put yourself into a box, you're able then to choose the best formats. Yeah, I've voted for various different parties. I've owned Nintendo, Xbox, Sega, and Sony PlayStations. I don't put myself into a box. I read every single comic out there, whether it's Valiant Comics, Bloodshot. Big shout out to Vin Diesel, really good movie release. DC, Marvel, IDW, and IDW stuff, guys, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Thundercats, Battle of the Planets, really good stuff to read. Valiant Comics, as I said, guys, Image Comics, there's a lot of good stuff out there. And people like myself who are comic book readers don't limit themselves to excellence. It's something we've never done. But with the movies, oh, I'm a Marvel fan, I'm a DC fan. You're doing that because you're an Apple fan, you're a Samsung fan, or you're an Xbox fan, or you're a PlayStation fan. What you're doing is you're limiting yourself to one ecosystem, to one set of rules, which you can only enjoy. And thus, if you don't understand that statement, then you won't understand this video. Because there is no such thing as being a Marvel fan. There's no such thing as being a DC fan. The only fan that there is a comic book movie fan. And that's someone who appreciates the genre. And believe me, guys, it is a genre. Do you remember the people 10 years ago that were saying, oh, this is going to die out, people are going to get bored with it and everything? No. Comic books have existed for over 80 years. Hollywood has run out of ideas. And when they do that, they tend to go to different medias. Which is why you see the Hunger Games, Harry Potter, all this stuff. It's because they find these great stories that works and then they convert them into films. Well, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of great comic book stories. And the industry is just learning to understand that. This 12-year run you've seen from the Marvel Universe, over 23 films. Do you think that's it? Do you really think that's it? No, it isn't. That's a couple of stories. Yeah? A couple of stories that have built up in that run. Yeah? A couple of stories. We've seen Iron Man 2, Demon in a Bottle, which was awful. We've seen Ragnarok 3, which incorporated World War Hulk, but the Ragnarok story itself, which was amazing, fantastic. And we've seen, obviously, it all builds up into Infinity Gauntlet. But along the way, there was these varying degrees of of a lot of stories that have been brought into the fray. But that is not even 1% of what the Marvel Universe has been able to achieve. Yeah? Secret Invasion, Secret Wars, all these different stories that they've been able to do. Dark Reign, you know, we've never seen any of that. Fear itself, none of that. Dark Avengers, none of that has come into the fray. Same with DC. You've seen DC do so many different things, and that's why Batman vs Superman was such an adored film among the fan base, because it actually follows the steps of what some of the stories in DC were trying to do. I wrote so many articles about that film because many people who don't read comics didn't understand what it was. It wasn't Batman vs Superman. It wasn't Superman. It was John Byrne's Man of Steel from 1986. It wasn't Batman from Bob Kane. It was Frank Miller's Dark Knight, again from the late 80s. These are very different people. These are not the people that you are used to seeing. They act differently, they think differently, thus making them different characters. Marvel's kind of not really like that as far as the multiverse goes. But you kind of enjoy everything because it's one industry. And I just really wanted to make this video about that so people would have a thorough understanding of why people enjoy comics. Yeah? So listen, I hope you've learned something from this video, because that's the whole point of it. But I want to say a big shout out to everybody who is a fan of the genre, because remember, it is, I said it is a genre. When you go out with your lady or you go out with your mates, you say to them, what do you want to see today? You want to see a thriller, sci-fi movie, comedy, a comic book movie. That's how it's come into the market. That's what we do now when we go to the cinema. It's a genre. And it's a very successful genre because it's making more money than anything else. Peace out, people. Hashtag stay home. Hashtag with me, and I'm out.